Hey guys, it's Justin at the Survival Review, and in anticipation for Star Trek Into Darkness, the new Star Trek movie, which is a movie I'm extremely hyped for, more than Iron Man 3, definitely. I wanted to do something Star Trek related, but I didn't want to do a review of all the movies, because that's 11 movies, and I just don't have the time, or I don't really want to do that. So, I was going to do my top 5 Star Trek movies. But I started realizing my top 5 is pretty much the same as everybody else's top 5. Maybe the order switched around a little bit, but for the most part, the top 5 movies are normally the same. So instead, I'm going to do a video of my opinion of all the Star Trek movies from worst to best. So I'm going to do brief reviews of all 11 Star Trek movies, just going from which ones I think are the worst all the way up to my favorite ones. So let's get started. Number 11, Star Trek Insurrection. Oh god, I really don't like this movie. I mean, the biggest problem with this movie is that it's just so dull. There's nothing interesting happening in this movie. It's well made, it's just the plot is just like an average episode. And I'm not saying Star Trek movies have to be like huge, but the plot needed to be bigger than this. I didn't care about anything that was happening. The plot revolves around something I haven't seen the movie in a while because I don't want to watch it again. I've only seen it once. And the plot revolves around something like this planet that has to be relocated or something, and the Enterprise are trying to save it. The people from the Enterprise are trying to save it or something. I don't know. I didn't care. It was really just an uninteresting movie. And most people would say Star Trek 5 is the worst. We'll get to that. I have to say Insurrection is worse, just because I don't want to see this movie ever again, and it's just such a dull, boring, crappy movie. Even the action scenes are dull, and Star Trek never had the greatest action scenes, but they're just really uninteresting and generic and just all around bad movie. Number 10, Star Trek V: The Final Frontier. Easily the worst out of the original crew movies, and the only one that I consider a really bad movie. It's just, the plot is interesting, the story is interesting about them trying to find God. That's really intriguing, but it's not well developed. The characters, they seem like cardboard cutouts of the characters. They don't seem like they're that. I think they seem like some random person's interpretation, oh, Scotty, he's a Scottish guy, so he's going to be drunk all the time, and ha ha ha, and just, the comedy is terribly unfunny, and the effects are really bad for that time, especially. The effects in the earlier movies are much better than that. It's just all around it's another movie. I can start saying it's bad, but I like this one a little bit better because they still kind of have the novelty of seeing the original crew, and actually the storyline was a little bit interesting, which is more than what can be said for Insurrection. But another movie that's bad. It's definitely worth skipping, especially out of all the original crew movies. It's definitely the worst. And yeah, that's all I can say about it. It sucks. Number 9, Star Trek Nemesis. Now, this is where Star Trek fans are going to definitely disagree with me. From these movies onwards, from 9 and onwards, I wouldn't particularly say they're bad movies. I mean, I'm not saying they're all great movies. They're definitely very flawed movies. But as they go, they're okay. Insurrection and Final Frontier, I would not recommend at all. I definitely say skip those two. Those two movies are just plain bad. But these ones, I'll have problems, but I'm just saying they're all at least okay. And Star Trek Nemesis is the last film for the Next Generation crew. And that's the biggest fault. The biggest problem with this movie is it tries to pander too much to the non-Trek fans by having all these big overblown action scenes, but they don't work. They don't fit with Star Trek. They're way too over the top and just too action oriented. But for the most part, the storyline is interesting about the clone of Picard and how the whole nature versus nurture thing, how he would have ended up if he had gone this route instead. That's really intriguing, and it's really cool seeing a young Tom Hardy muscle. So that's really interesting. The biggest problem is that it's the final movie for the Next Generation crew, As a finale, it doesn't work. It's a really disappointing final movie for these guys. Like, especially if you watched all 7 seasons of the show and the first 3 Next Generation movies, that's not the best way to go out. And that's the biggest flaw. But as it stands on its own right, as a Star Trek movie, it's okay. It has some cool elements, a lot of problems, but it's okay. Not great, but nothing special. Number 8, Star Trek The Motion Picture. The first film in the series is really low on the list, and for a good reason. It's a very just slow, boring, uninteresting movie. Another thing where it has interesting ideas. There's some good concepts, but it's a movie that the plot is only like an hour and a half, but the movie goes on for 2.5 hours, and it's painfully slow. The characters don't get much to do. Like, the crew, it's just, most of the time they're just there. And it mostly focuses on Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. And much as they're great characters, but you want to see the rest of the crew. But they kind of take a backseat for the other 2 main characters, Deckard and Ilia, I think. And they're really dull characters. But not only that, which is one thing they learned for the next films and subsequent movies, the design of the movie is really bad. I mean, like, the costume designs are like this really grayish, yellowish color, and just like the color scheme of the ship is always like darkly lit. And so I didn't like the way the movie looked either, but it's an interesting movie. It's, like I said, it's okay. It's another one like Nemesis. It's extremely flawed. If you're like a newcomer to Star Trek, do not watch that movie. Don't be like, oh, it's Star Trek 1, so I must check it out. No. You'll watch the movie and be like, wow, this is Star Trek? This is the thing that's endured all these times? It doesn't really represent Star Trek. It goes for being like 2001 Space Odyssey, which is like an experience. But that's not what Star Trek is. Star Trek is like really good stories. And not like just an experience. There's like more to it. And that's where this movie falls short. Number 7, Star Trek Generations. The first Next Generation crew movie. And it's another one, like I said, I know a lot of people hate this one. It's okay. It's a movie that really could have been better. They didn't handle putting in Captain Kirk. They didn't handle that right. And spoiler, for those who haven't seen it, Kirk dies at the end. And I don't mind killing off Captain Kirk. I'm fine with that. They just didn't do it right. His death, like, he dies for no really good reason. And it's a really crappy way for the main character of the Star Trek franchise to die. And it's a really cheap way. And that's the biggest problem. Like, the way he dies in the opening scene, where like he gets put into the Nexus, is a much better way for him to go out than the way he actually does. But as it stands, it's an okay movie. I didn't know if I was going to put this higher than Motion Picture or not, but the one thing that made it go higher is the whole scene where the Enterprise crashes. That is a great scene. Some of the best special effects in a Star Trek movie, and such a fun, cool, crazy scene, like, of the whole ship crashing into the forest and everything, and all the seats breaking and people flying. A really cool scene. And it was cool seeing a film version of the Next Generation crew. Like, I didn't see it in theaters. I wasn't alive when the movie came out, I don't think. But I had watched the show, so seeing a movie version, it was still kind of cool, even though some of the lighting is off, so the sets don't look the same. But for the most part, it's an enjoyable movie, extremely flawed plot-wise. Acting-wise, it's good. It was really cool seeing Captain Picard and Kirk in the same shot together, in the same scene. That was cool seeing them interacting. But for the most part, it's just another meh movie. Flawed, definitely. But it was, like I said, I don't hate it as much. I don't hate it. A lot of people hated it. It's good, but nothing special. Number 6, Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. Now, the reason why this movie isn't considered really that good is I think is because it's in the middle of Star Trek 2 and 4, which are great movies. And this one is it's very good. Star Trek 3 is a very good movie. It's just not as good as 2 and 4, so it feels a little weird. The biggest problem is that it feels like they're trying to just get rid of everything they did in 2. Like killing off Spock, they redo that. Kirk's son, spoiler, they kill him off, so it kind of redoes that. And that's the biggest problem, but as it stands, it's a fun adventure. It was cool having like Kirk and them defy the rules and just leave. It was interesting having like Spock's mind in McCoy, and they found a kind of cool way, not great, but kind of cool way to bring back Spock. It still feels forced because they really did a good job of killing them off, but they found a cool way to bring him back. Christopher Lloyd, Doc Brown from Back to the Future, is a ton of fun as the Klingon villain. Out of all the odd number movies that a lot of people like, because a lot of people hate, the odd number movies are usually the worst. Out of all of them, besides the new Star Trek, which is technically Star Trek 11, this is the best. It's the most well done. I don't rewatch it as much as the other ones, but it's a fun movie. There's a few special effects that don't work as well, don't hold up as well, but for the most part the effects are good. Another scene of crashing the Enterprise is done really well, and they don't crash it, but they blow it up, and that scene is awesome. Whenever they destroy the Enterprise, I guess it's a cool thing. But that scene has a lot of cool build-up, and it's a fun movie. Okay, now we're to the top 5. These are the ones that I consider great. The ones that I say are just really awesome and very, very, very good movies. And I'm not saying, even though I criticized the past few a lot, besides Insurrection and Final Frontier, the rest of them are good. Not great, flawed, but pretty good. These are like the top ones. These are the great ones. Number 5, Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. This was the final movie for the original crew, and they sent them off perfectly. Whereas Star Trek V nearly killed the franchise, they luckily were smart enough to be like, oh, we don't want this to be our finale to the series, so let's do one more and send them off with a bang, and they did. Star Trek VI is a really fun movie. It's not like the biggest, it's not epic. They weren't just like, oh, it's their final movie, let's make it huge. No, it's a little more calmer, a little more smaller, but it still works. There's really interesting murder mystery during the whole movie, which is really done well, and especially if you first time seeing the movie, you really are into it. Wait, whoa, the clues they're finding, that works perfectly, and just the ending, the final scene with the crew, you can't help but get the chills while watching it, especially if you're a Star Trek fan. It's a perfect scene that ends out the series, and I love how it ended with them signing their name in the thing. That was really cool. I really like that. Overall, it's a really fun movie and just really good story. That's what Star Trek is all about. It's the story, and this had a really good story. It was great. All the characters were in top form because you felt like they were starting to get stale a little bit by 5, but luckily that was just the writing, and the actors are still in top form, and they did a great job at 6. Definitely an awesome movie. Number 4, Star Trek: First Contact. This was the second and easily the best Next Generation movie. It had a really cool story. It has the best Star Trek villain, the Borg, in it, and the Borg is awesome. It was really awesome seeing them. Great special effects. There's some good scenes where the ships are fighting the Borg cube. I think there's a name to it, but I'm sorry, I forgot. That stuff's really good. The story's really cool. Kind of has a time travel aspect to it, and it was cool seeing where everything began. I guess awesome seeing that the first aliens that we ever met were the Vulcans. That was funny, and it was cool seeing Picard, because I know a lot of people complained about the Next Generation movies, that Picard just became an action hero, and I see what they mean, and this is the only one where it works, and you can tell why, because he has a big grudge against the Borg, and it's really great to see that. Patrick Stewart, great actor, is awesome in this movie as Picard. It was really cool seeing Picard go a little crazy, like that one scene where he's on the holodeck and he's shooting the Borg with a machine gun. That was awesome, and the best Next Generation movie perfectly captures it. All the characters have things to do that fit their character. I mean, Picard, like I said, becomes action hero a little bit, but for the most part, it fits their characters. They get more to do, and awesome, cool story, and just all around awesome movie. I love it. Number 3, J.J. Abrams' Star Trek. This movie, I call this movie a perfect movie. I mean, I can watch it whenever, any time of day, any day, and just it still is a fun movie. Great acting, probably the best reboot out there. I know people have problems with it, like the big Star Trek fans, and I understand, but this movie was my introduction to Star Trek. I was never a big Star Trek fan, but this movie just really got me interested, and I remember seeing it and just being blown away, and so it really got me. After that, I started watching the original series, and after that, that's how I got started. And great acting, an interesting choice to go the whole like alternate timeline route, so they're not like burdened by it being a prequel. And you know, like if it's a prequel, people are gonna complain about everything. Like, well, that didn't happen the way it happened in the original. And like going to reboot this, like all the timeline, they go, well, too bad. That's how it happens in this timeline. And just, I mean, you can, if you really think about it, you can pick apart this movie. Nero, the bad guy, very one-dimensional. But it looks like they're improved that for Into Darkness. But as it stands, he's really one-dimensional bad guy. Just he wants to get revenge on Spock. And the scene at the beginning where young Kirk is driving the car, what's the point in that scene? It's a very unnecessary scene. But it's a lot of fun, and I understand like that Star Trek wasn't really a big action franchise, but I feel this has a lot of action, but it handled the characters well. They were still well developed and with a lot of characteristics. The acting didn't take a back seat to the action. You know, I felt the characters were still there. Everything about this movie just rocks. I just have to say, I know it sounds like very generic, but like it's such a fun, awesome, great movie. And like I said, even though I love this movie, I understand if you're a big Star Trek fan and you don't like it. I perfectly understand that. But I, for one, am not the hugest Star Trek fan, so I don't get too worked up over this stuff. In fact, I just think it's crazy what they did by like destroying Vulcan. That's really ballsy of them to do that. And all around, great movie, lots of fun. Even if you're not a Star Trek fan, definitely check out this one. It's definitely worth it. Number 2. This may surprise people a little bit. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Now, before you guys go all crazy and be like, oh, it's the best Star Trek movie ever, it's the greatest, I love this movie. It's great. It's perfect. If you want to be introduced to like classic Star Trek, this is the one you gotta see. It does everything perfect. Alright? But my next movie, I'll get to my reasons why I like that one a little bit better. So don't worry. Star Trek II, though, it captures the essence of the TV show, which the motion picture didn't at all. It captures the fun, but also the deep story, the great characters. Probably he is the best villain in Star Trek history, Khan, and just for a movie in general, a great villain. For the major character to square off, it perfectly develops the characters. Like, they don't just ignore the fact that Kirk is getting old, and they don't hit you over the head with it, you know, but they do a good balance of him getting older, but while still making him a great character. And that's how, and the ending with, spoiler I guess, kind of, I probably already spoiled it earlier, with killing killing Spock, is still one of like the saddest scenes in the movie. Even though you know they practically retconned it in the third one, it's still a great scene and emotional. Even though you know he comes back, it's still a very well done scene and just great movie, just perfect. If you want to introduce yourself to classic Star Trek, either check out the original series or this movie, and there you go. This will definitely win you over. You don't have to be a Star Trek fan to like this one. I feel you don't. It's easily accessible to other people, and it's a great movie. Number 1, Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. Now I know it's usually Voyage Home and Wrath of Khan in the top 2, and usually Wrath of Khan is 1, but I had to go with Voyage Home because this one was the most fun. For those who don't know, it's commonly referred to as the one with the whale, because they have to go back in time to present day or 1980s to find a humpback whale to bring into the future to save something. That part's a little confusing, but for the most part, it's such a fun movie, and all the fish out of water jokes with them coming back in time, they all work perfectly. They all nail it, and they're all hilarious. Usually those are hit and miss, and sometimes they're like, oh, Ha ha, I see what they did there. But they're all funny. The story is story is a lot of fun. McCoy, Dr. McCoy, who's probably my favorite character in the whole like universe, he gets a lot of great stuff to do in this movie, a lot of fun stuff to do in this movie. And it's just, yeah, I have to say this one's my favorite. I mean, like I said, I love Wrath of Khan. I love it, but I have to go Voyage Home. It's just such a fun movie. The characters work, and they don't overdo the fish out of water stuff. They certainly don't underdo it, but they do a good balance. And like I said, all those jokes are funny. I will agree though that like for regular like Star Trek story wise, because Star Trek isn't usually about time traveling to the 1980s, but usually normal story wise, yeah, Star Trek 2 is the way to go because it's your most average, not in a bad way. I don't know if this making sense what I'm saying, but like regular Star Trek movie, you know. But Star Trek 4 is different, but it still is an awesome movie. I was a little skeptical going into this one. I'm like, oh, this is the one where they go back in time. And it sounds like it'd be terrible, honestly, and it works. It's an awesome, hilarious, great movie. And that's my list of the Star Trek movies from worst to best. I know there's probably some Star Trek fans out there that heavily disagree with me on some of these, but that's my opinion. And I can't wait for Star Trek Into Darkness. I have no idea where that's going to place on the list. Hopefully it places high, because I have high expectations for it. But we'll see when we get to there. That's about it. I'll talk to you guys later.